Former Senate Minority Leader Senator Abiodun Olujimi has weighed in on the ongoing disputes between Senate President Godswill Akpabio and Kogi Central Senator Natasha Akpoti-Uduaghan. The dispute began over a seating arrangement which led Mrs. Akpoti-Uduaghan to file a defamation lawsuit against both Akpabio and his senior legislative aide Mfon Patrick. In her lawsuit, she is seeking a staggering 100 billion naira in damages and 300 million naira in litigation costs. The legal battle traces back to a Facebook post allegedly made by Mr. Patrick following a heated argument between the Senate President and Mrs. Akpoti-Uduaghan. The conflict intensified when, in an interview with Arise Television, Mrs. Akpoti-Uduaghan accused the Senate President of sexual harassment. The opposition People's Democratic Party (PDP) member recounted an incident that occurred on December 8, 2023 during a visit to Mr. Akpabio's residence in Uyo, the Akwa Ibom state capital, alongside her husband. In response, Mrs. Akpabio vehemently defended her husband, dismissing the sexual harassment allegations as baseless and unfounded. She has since filed 2 defamation lawsuits of her own against Mrs. Akpoti-Uduaghan, demanding 350 billion naira in damages for tarnishing her husband's reputation. However, during an appearance on Arise TV, former Senator Abiodun Olujimi, who represented Ekiti South, offered her take on the situation. She faulted Senator Akpoti-Uduaghan, stating that according to Senate rules, members are expected to remain in their assigned seats and not speak outside of them. Senator Olujimi further emphasized that the Senate is a place for experienced lawmakers, not younger generation. She stressed that once in the Senate, one must comport themselves appropriately and manage interactions with colleagues carefully.
There's something called the Red Book in the Senate. You're given the day you come in. You're supposed to go through it and learn it by heart for the period you will spend within the Senate. One of them is that you can never speak outside of your seat. You can't. It is a rule and it is binding. I came back, like I said, into the 9th Senate from the courts, and it took them time to rearrange the seats before I could get a proper seat, because I left the A Senate as a leader. Okay. I was in the leadership. So they had to adjust the seats. In fact, senators like Senator James Manager, who had been there for over 4 terms, 16 years, had to move for me to be allocated a seat because I left as a minority leader. And that is part of the rules of the Senate. It's binding. We all know it. We learn it by heart. And it works well when you learn to understand how to manage it. It's all about management. You know, the Senate is for the elderly. It's not for the young. It's for people who would have been through life, seen it all, and are willing to just work.
Supposedly seen it all.
Seen it all, supposedly. And work well for the country. And so when you are there, you comport yourself, you manage people. Order 10 is not difficult to manage, but the chief whip stood up before she proclaimed Order 10 and said to the Senate President, Senator Natasha cannot speak from there because she's not on her allotted seat.
Okay, so it was not started by the President of the Senate?
No, it was the chief whip.
That caution.
And that is his job. He is in charge of the chambers. He maintains law and order. That is why he's called the chief whip. The Senate President didn't start it. I watched it. It was the chief whip that got up and laid a complaint, and then the Senate President ruled on it. Once the gavel goes down, you really cannot do much because it's over. So he ruled on it, and said you must go to your seat before you speak. So whatever order you bring after then cannot work.
So order 10 does not work here.
It cannot work.
So she's out of order.
That was what the Senate President said. I rule this out of order. And when it's out of order, it's out of order.
You're wasting your time.
The rest is history.
This growing feud continues to stir up controversy in the political landscape as the legal battles unfold. Cassandra Yunumbe, Eagles FM News.